and welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. So in today's episode, we're going to go over the political satire film from 1999, Dick, also known as Dick, the Unmaking of a President, or in Germany, it was released as Ich liebe Dick, which I think is kind of funny. And so this movie is pretty much a comedic reimagining of what happened at the Watergate break-ins of in 1970s USA. And then it's also a parody of All the President's Men, which was a movie that came out in 1976 that covered the Watergate break-in and how the Washington Post broke the story about what actually really happened at Watergate. And how Woodward and Bernstein, two of their reporters, were able to help crack this story. And so I'm going to give you a few figures about this film, and then we're going to move into critical response, some pull quotes that I got. Then we'll move into a little bit of a history lesson, and then a plot summary. So, a little bit about this movie. This was released, the premiere was July 23rd, 1999, and the U.S. theatrical release of the movie was August 4th, 1999. The budget of this movie was about $13 million, and unfortunately, it was an overall box office gross of $6.2 million. So it's not exactly great when you're looking at return on the investment, but I do think that this film is, deeply funny on a certain level. We're looking at a Rotten Tomatoes score of 71% on the tomato meter, and then 53% of an audience score. We're looking at 6.2 out of 10 on IMDb, and a Letterboxd score of 3.4 out of 5. So, this movie, I believe, was shot around spring of 1998, and my figure for that is, I was actually watching it with the Blu-ray commentary track, which had the director Andrew Fleming, and then the co-writer of this film, he and Sheryl Longin wrote this film, and they were talking about how a certain event happened in Hollywood during the shooting of a certain scene of this film, and how that event affected some people on the set. And that particular event happened in spring of 1998. That'll make way more sense later on in the podcast when I talk about that. But that's where I get the figure of when this was filmed. This was filmed partly in D.C., Washington, D.C., and then mostly really, was in Canada for those tax benefits. This also then puts Kirsten Dunst at age 16 and Michelle Williams at about age 17 at the time, which I think is cool because these two girls are playing 15-year-olds, and so they stayed pretty age appropriate for the roles that they were having. So now we're going to move into some critical response pull quotes from some critics at the time. We have Chuck Rudolph of the Matinee Magazine saying, "The movie quickly thunders downhill like a massive boulder, effectively trampling things like common sense, taste, and most importantly, historical significance." We got Robert Payne from Real.com, who said, "The thing Dick resembles most is a wildly uneven Saturday Night Live skit." And then we have Barbara Schulgeiser from the Chicago Tribune saying, "The movie has the comedic sophistication of a creaky high school skit." So that is what we're looking at in terms of the reviewers at the time. But I personally think this movie is funny. It's currently on Hulu right now. It was on Tubi at one point. I actually first found it on Pluto TV. I will say I don't always like using Pluto TV because there's a little too many ads for me. And I think Tubi really is that girl where you have a nice, cute little countdown of when the ad break is going to happen and all of that. So I personally am a Tubi stan. But again, I think this movie is really fun. It's kind of silly humor, but it's a nice satire of what was going on at that time. It also kind of it's a little bit of a satire and a comment of what was going on at the time this was released. And I'll get to that later. So before we hop into the plot summary of this movie, Dick, I wanted to give some context about what exactly the Watergate Scandal was in American history, and then also a little bit about who Woodward and Bernstein are, in case people who are listening may not know about it. So I went on my trusty phone on Google and found a History.com article that pretty much talks about the Watergate Scandal. and I'm literally reading it verbatim off my phone. So again, I wanted to make sure we got this information first, so that we can kind of contextualize what this movie is all about, and then also just a little bit of a history lesson. So let's get started. So the origins of the Watergate break-in lay in the hostile political climate of the time. So in 1972, when Republican President Richard Nixon was running for re-election, the United States was embroiled in the middle of the Vietnam War, and because of this, the country was deeply divided on whether or not we should have gone to war at all. And so a forceful presidential campaign seemed like a great idea to the president and his aides at the time. However, their aggressive tactics included what turned out to be illegal espionage. So in May of 1972, as evidence would later show, members of Nixon's committee to re-elect the president, also known as CREEP, broke into the Democratic National Committee's Watergate headquarters. They stole copies of top-secret documents, and they bugged the office phones. And also keeping in mind that Watergate also had apartment buildings as well. So, for example, Monica Lewinsky, who was an intern that was embroiled in a scandal in the 90s at the White House with Bill Clinton, she lived at the Watergate when she was working there. So people would live there and do all sorts of kind of stuff. So the wiretaps, though, failed to work properly. So on June 17th, 1972, a group of 5 burglars returned to the Watergate building. As these prowlers were preparing to break into the office with a new microphone, a security guard noticed that someone had taped over several of the building's door locks. The guard called the police, and then the police came and arrived just in time to catch the burglars red-handed. It wasn't immediately clear, though, that the burglars were actually connected to the president, though suspicions were raised when these detectives found copies of the re-election committee's White House phone numbers among the burglars' belongings. And so then in August of 1972, Nixon gave a speech in which he said that none of his White House staff was involved in this break-in. Most people believed him, and then in November of 1972, the president was reelected by a landslide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Nixon's obstruction of justice. So it then later came to light that Nixon was not being truthful. So, for example, a few days after the break-in, he arranged to provide hundreds of thousands of dollars in quote-unquote hush money to the burglars. And then Nixon and his aides hatched a plan to instruct the Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA, to impede the FBI's investigation of the crime. So this was a more serious crime than the actual break-in. This was an abuse of presidential power and a deliberate obstruction of justice. And so meanwhile, 7 conspirators were indicted on charges related to this Watergate scandal, this affair, and that at the urging of Nixon's aides, 5 pled guilty to avoid trial, and the other 2 were convicted in January of 1973. So now we'll learn a little bit about who Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were. So these guys were Washington Post reporters. There's also a trial judge named John J. Sirica, and members of a Senate investigating committee had begun to suspect that there was a larger scheme afoot going on. And at the same time, some of these conspirators who had to have pled guilty and everything were cracking under the pressure of this cover-up. And so they also had an anonymous whistleblower by the name of quote-unquote Deep Throat who was providing key information to Woodward and Bernstein. But we wouldn't find out the actual identity of Deep Throat until literally around 2005 or so, something like that. A handful of his aides, including White House counsel John Dean, testified before a grand jury about the president's crimes. They also testified that Nixon had secretly taped every conversation that took place in the Oval Office. And if prosecutors could get their hands on these tapes, they would have proof of the president's guilt. But Nixon struggled to protect those tapes during the summer and fall of 1973. His lawyers argued that the president's executive privilege allowed him to keep the tapes to himself, but Judge Sirica, that Senate committee, and an independent special prosecutor named Archibald Cox were all determined to obtain these tapes. So now we're going to get into a little something called the Saturday Night Massacre. So when Archie Cox refused to stop demanding for these tapes, Nixon ordered that he be fired, which then led to several Justice Department officials to resign in protest. And so these events, which took place on October 20th, 1973, were known as the quote-unquote Saturday Night Massacre. Eventually, Nixon agreed to surrender some, but not all, of those tapes. Early in 1974, the cover-up and the efforts to impede the Watergate investigation began to unravel. So on March 1st, 1974, a grand jury appointed by a new special prosecutor indicted 7 of Nixon's former aides on various charges related to this Watergate scandal. So the jury, unsure if they could actually indict a sitting president, called Nixon an unindicated co-conspirator. And in July, the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to turn over the tapes, and while the president dragged his feet, the House Judiciary Committee voted to impeach Nixon for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, criminal cover-up, and several violations of the Constitution. And then we get to Nixon resigning. So finally, on August 5th, 1974, Nixon released the tapes, which proved, without a doubt, of his complicity in the Watergate crimes. So in the face of almost certain impeachment by Congress, Nixon resigned in disgrace on August 8th, 1974, and left office the following day. 6 weeks later, after Vice President Gerald Ford was sworn in as the president, he pardoned Nixon for any crimes that he had committed while he was in office. But some of Nixon's aides weren't so lucky. They were convicted of very serious offenses, and they were sent to federal prison. Some of these include Nixon's Attorney General of the United States, John Mitchell, who served 19 months for his role in the scandal, while Watergate mastermind G. Gordon Liddy, a former FBI agent, served 4.5 years. Nixon's Chief of Staff, H.R. Haldeman, spent 19 months in prison, while John Ehrlichman spent 18 months for attempting to cover up the break-in. But Nixon himself never admitted to any criminal wrongdoing, although he did acknowledge that he used poor judgment. So, because of this abuse of presidential power, this had a long-lasting effect on just American political life. It created an atmosphere of cynicism and distrust among the American people. So while many Americans were deeply dismayed by the outcome of the Vietnam War, they were saddened by assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and other leaders like that, Watergate added further disappointment to a national climate that was already soured by the difficulties and the losses of the previous decade. So when we're looking at this movie, Dick, that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're looking at. So it does contextualize a little bit about what this movie is. So let's get on to a plot summary. So we open on a television interview that is conducted by just the quote-unquote interviewer with Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Bob Woodward is played by Will Ferrell, and Carl Bernstein is played by Bruce McCullough. Will Ferrell at this time had been known for being in Night at the Roxbury and also as a cast member on SNL. And Bruce McCullough had been known for being in The Kids in the Hall, which was a Canadian, or still is a Canadian, comedy troupe, where there's a few other kids in the hall in this movie as well. The interviewer of this television interview is played by French Stewart, who by this time was known for being on Third Rock from the Sun with a baby Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and also Kirsten Johnson. So it's been years since we've known who Deep Throat is. We still don't know. Watergate's this big deal. And French Stewart, it pretty much says, like, I don't think there was any Deep Throat. And you can see Carl and you see Woodward and Bernstein kind of, like, get all flustered and talk about, don't tell him, because they're just too embarrassed that, like, Deep Throat actually ended up being 2 teenage girls in this movie. And then they just, like, start to fight and stuff. And then I think Woodward says, you smell like cabbage to Bernstein or something. It's really wild and silly. So then you move from this scene to an opening of a typewriter, and you see the typewriter typing, and you hear Kirsten Dunst say, oh, shoot. And so you get the opening credits of this movie, and you can see that Kirsten Dunst is typing at this typewriter while... So her name's Betsy Jobs. You can see Betsy typing at this typewriter while her friend, Arlene Lorenzo, played by Michelle Williams, is talking about why she should have a date with Bobby Sherman, because they're entering, or at least Arlene's entering, the Win a Date with Bobby Sherman contest. And she's, Betsy's typing away, and Arlene's like, I think I could type a little faster than you, though. While in the meantime of this, you also see, because Arlene, they're in Arlene's room, she lives at the Watergate, and you see, as part of this, you see also across the street from the Watergate, a stakeout going on about what's going on with Watergate and the break-in. And so you see these guys just, like, spying on these girls in their room, pretty much. So then they're, trying to get everything together so that the break-in can go, without a hitch and all that. So the girls, Betsy and Arlene, they're getting their stuff together to get the letter to Win a Date with Bobby Sherman into the mailbox by a certain time. So Arlene has this ingenious idea that, I'm going to tape the lock of this door so that, nobody will tell my mom that we're, like, sneaking out to go do this because they could get in trouble. And so they go to the mailbox and they put in their Bobby Sherman date letter, and they're coming back into the Watergate, which by this time they had evaded the security guard that they called Fat Freddy, and they evaded him, and they're walking back up the little, like, I don't know, parking garage stairs or something like that, back up to where Arlene lives at the Watergate. And they run into none other than G. Gordon Liddy, played by Mr. Burns himself, Harry Shearer, from The Simpsons, most well known for that at this time, probably. And G. Gordon Liddy finds these girls, and I think it's really funny. There's a line in there where, It's Betsy saying something about jewel thieves, because they thought that there was, like, this jewel heist going on. It's really silly. But G. Gordon Liddy finds these girls, and he's wondering who they are, and, like, by the time, you have this, it could be the Soviet Union of America or something like that, he says. And then Betsy and Arlene just scream and run away, and that's how they deal with it. And then when they get back up to Arlene's apartment, they see that the police have already actually stopped by, and they were arresting the quote-unquote jewel thieves. It's what they think it happened. You then go into another scene with Betsy and Arlene with their classmates, and they're going to the White House. And you find out about they're going to go on a class trip to McDonald's after they're done their trip, which is nice. So some fun little facts about this particular part of the movie, this first part of the movie. The opening scene with French Stewart and Will Ferrell and Bruce McCullough, that was actually added in afterward, after principal photography, because what that was supposed to do is explaining about Watergate for people who didn't know about it. It gives them a little bit of context of what exactly the movie's about. The line about, I think it was Bernstein smelling like cabbage, that comes from a Kids in the Hall reference. I didn't watch Kids in the Hall or anything. It was before my time a little bit, but that was specifically from a character that Bruce had done on that show, and so it was kind of a fun little Easter egg, if you will. The typewriter scene that has the opening sequence, the opening title sequence, is literally referencing All the President's Men, because that's how All the President's Men movie opens, with a typewriter. The director actually used action shots at Watergate, so they were actually shooting stuff where Watergate was. They were shooting exteriors of this, but they were pretty much, I guess, I think they were actually following All the President's Men, how they kind of handled it, because the scenes look kind of similar to how the break-in looked. Like when I was just watching it recently, I was like, oh, this very much looks like Dick, but which is the reference, And then the score of this movie was created to kind of mimic like a 70s movie. I think Andrew Fleming said something about how he wanted this to like feel kind of like a Haley Mills movie, which I think is really funny. Like he just wanted it to feel like, I don't know, the original like Pollyanna, or like he wanted the music to really feel like you were in a movie from the 70s, which I thought was kind of fun. And then the fun fact was that the exterior of the White House that you see when the class is standing in line, that's actually a model. It was not the real White House, of course. And those White House exteriors were actually shot in Toronto. They were using like part of a parking lot at the Toronto Zoo or something like that to shoot those particular scenes. So that's a little bit of fun facts for that. And then also kind of another fun thing, and we'll get into it, but when we get into the White House interiors, the crew and the director and all that had took a public tour and also a private tour of the White House for research. So they literally went through to kind of see what the layout of the White House was so that they could mimic it in this movie. Have the girls in the White House interior. They meet G. Gordon Liddy, which they had just met him like the night before or something, and they thought that he was the guy who sold corn dogs at the mall, but he's just weirder than the guy who sells corn dogs, though. And then on the floor, because they saw that this list was actually on G. Gordon Liddy's shoe, but it was the creep list. And the creep list was the committee to reelect the president. But this list actually was names and amounts of money that the committee was paid off, pretty much. But get into that later. My little history lesson talked about that. And then the girls meet, they end up meeting Haldeman because Haldeman goes up and introduces himself to them. And he asks, like, do you want to see the West Wing of the White House? And they're like, yeah, sure. And so this is all a way for him to get them into a little like conference room area to be like, you know, when you think of your president, do you think unpure thoughts? Do you think bad thoughts? And H.R. Haldeman is played by Dave Foley, who at this time, he was a kid in the hall, but he was also on, mainly, he was playing on news radio at the time. He played Dave Nelson on there. He voiced the main character Flick in A Bug's Life, and he's just had like a nice career, but that was him. And so, yeah, H.R. Haldeman's talking to them, and he's just like, oh my god, these girls are so dumb, and they're not a threat to national security, apparently, which I thought was kind of funny. And then the girls actually meet Richard Nixon, who he asks them to call him Dick. And they see the dog, Checkers. And Checkers, so Arlene does this like weird little dog whistle to get Checkers' attention so that he comes into the room that Haldeman had them in. And then that's what gets Dick's attention to come over and actually like meet these girls. He goes over to Haldeman and is like, who are these girls? And he's just like, I've met yams with more going on upstairs than these two. But then Richard Nixon's like, well, I have a way with teenagers and, you know, all that. Because he had children of his own, I guess. And he starts talking to these girls, and it's like real nice, and they're just getting to know each other, and they don't know anything about it. They just know that he is the president, I guess, but they don't know much else about it. And so this is the scene where Dick actually asked them to be the official dog walkers for the White House. And they're just like, oh my god, that's so great. Love it. Awesome. So then you have a scene where the girls go back to the bus. And so the bus, they were late coming back, which was not great. And so because of this, they missed out on the lunch opportunity for McDonald's. Now they have to go back to school and have a cold lunch. And then all the kids are just like mad at them and being like, you guys suck. And they're like flipping them off and all that kind of stuff. But then Betsy and Arlene are just in their own little world. And they're just like laughing to themselves in their seats because like they're the only, you know, they're each other's best friends and they don't care what everyone thinks. So then you see them skip merrily over to, they were skipping to Betsy's house, and then they're just skipping along to there because she lives a little differently than Arlene does. And then when they get home, they're just like, to Betsy's family, they're just like, guess what happened to us today? And then in the middle of this, you see that Betsy's brother, Larry, played by Devin Gummersall, who at this point had been known for My So-Called Life, that television show. You find out that he actually got drafted to the Vietnam War because this is still going on, and it really just breaks Betsy's heart, you know. And then Arlene talks to Betsy about, you know, she's checking to see if she's okay, but then it's funny because like she's like, I don't know what we're going to do with his, like, horrible dresser and his bed and all that, you know, because I wanted his room. Which I thought that was kind of funny, of just, like, she's only so worried about her brother, but really she just wants his room, which I thought was kind of fun. And then, so some fun facts about this part of the movie, this little batch of scenes. So the director, Andy Fleming, and Sheryl Longin, they actually kept their tour badges from the tour that they took in the White House. I would too. That'd be kind of cool. And so actually you meet a couple of the other people as well in... there's a whole scene of kind of these White House aides that... you know, Nixon has with him, and they're all kind of like talking to each other. You meet Henry Kissinger, who's played by Saul Rubinek. You meet H.R. Haldeman, like I said. You meet G. Gordon Liddy. You also meet John Dean, who is played by Jim Brewer in this movie. And so you meet a couple of them in that scene where Dick introduces himself to the girls. But John Dean, the actual real John Dean, read the script for Dick, and he said he thought it was cute and funny, which I thought was kind of nice. And he gave the director some other ideas about this since he lived through it. But that's, like, really cool that John Dean actually read this script and thought it was cute and funny. So in the scene where Betsy and Arlene are going back to the bus, there's this blonde hippie kid that has, like, longer hair, and he's, like, looking out the window, or his head's out the window. That's actually Andrew Fleming's nephew named Cole. So, you know, a little bit of nepotism got him into the movie, I guess, but didn't have much of a big role or anything. He actually flips them off, which is kind of funny. So Arlene and Betsy skipping over to Betsy's house was actually shot in Georgetown, which is crazy because I thought this was actually done in Canada, I guess, because I live in Baltimore, so, like, you know, I've been to DC a handful of times, and I was just like, oh my god, this doesn't look like DC, what are they talking about? But then it actually was shot in Georgetown. But Betsy's actual house was in Toronto, and it was actually an art gallery, I believe, which is kind of cool. And they just made it look like a home, I guess. Devin Gummersall throughout this movie is wearing this, like, weird kind of, like, sort of fro kind of hairstyle. It was very much a wig that they had at the time. So, of course, it was a wig. But so the girls decide that they want to make these cookies called Hello Dollies, and they're going to be making them for the president. And so... during this Hello Dolly baking session, they talk about, you know, Arlene talks about how her dad is dead and her mom doesn't really tell her much about him or anything like that. And they're just like, you know, Betsy has all these ideas of, like, oh, maybe he was, like, married before and he had to, like, protect his reputation. Or it could even be worse, that maybe you meet somebody and you find out that they were actually your father or whatever. And which brings one of the best lines in this movie is just, like, she's talking about that. Arlene says something about, like, wow, my life's just so dramatic. And then Kirsten Dunst, Betsy, she's just, like, talking about, like, oh my god, maybe this guy could have been your dad, or maybe you meet somebody who ends up being your dad. And she says, it's called incest, Arlene, and it's against the law. Just, like, so matter-of-factly, which I think is really funny. So they make these Hello Dollies, but it's kind of weird because the walnuts that they're putting in there have these, like, little green leaves in them, which, you know, is not really explained. But it's like, oh, okay, well, they just come from the walnut tree. So after they make their Hello Dollies, they go to the White House, but they get turned away, unfortunately. And so this is when Michelle Williams delivers the prophetic line, "You are a meanie," which I really enjoy. And then you have a scene with the girls and Larry, who are watching some television, and Larry's, like, making some kind of, like, drug stuff or whatever. I don't know what he's doing, but he's, like, making some sort of concoction. And then the girls are talking about how, you know, hey, we gave the Hello Dollies to mom and dad to, you know, taste, but then they just started giggling and then they went upstairs and they're probably having sex now. And so it's just, like, really fun. So then you have that little scene, and then the girls go to school. They're sitting in a little auditorium, and they're talking about, like, you know, yeah, we should go back to the White House, and we should go and see Dick. You know, maybe we can ask him to end the war, but only if, you know, Betsy wants to end the war, because I know that, you know, she does want her brother Larry's room. But she still wants to, even though she does want his room, she would still want her brother to live, which totally makes sense. So then they go to the White House. They somehow are able to get in now. And they try to, I think it's Betsy trying to flirt with one of the security guards or something. She takes out her lip gloss and she lines her lips with it. And then Arlene does her little dog whistle, and this kind of makes a commotion, and then they're almost escorted out. But then they see that German guy, hey, German guy, who is Henry Kissinger, and they see Henry Kissinger and they talk to him, and they're like, remember us? We have to talk to Dick about the war. And then Henry Kissinger's like, oh, of course, ladies, I'll take responsibility for this and all this. So Henry Kissinger walks them over to the Oval Office where they can go see the president. You also get an introduction to Rosemary Woods, who was played by Anna Gasteyer, in a small role. And so Henry Kissinger takes them over, and then even though Rosemary's the president has the weight of the free world on his shoulders, can't just see anybody, but then Dick just welcomes them into the office, which is really nice. And so the girls just sit there and they talk to Dick, and they give him the Hello Dollies that they made. And he's just they then have a very nice, serious conversation about stopping the war. And, talking about how, people aren't worried, people at our school aren't worried about communism, but they're worried, but everyone's talking about Mac Washington because, he died over in Vietnam. And, Betsy's brother just got drafted, he's maintaining. And Dick's just talking and talking. I think he's even recording this as well. He's recording some of this as well. He just kind of slyly does that. And so, they're talking. And President Nixon, so Dick, he's talking about he's oh, I'm feeling lightheaded. And he just really likes the cookies. And then he just goes, woohoo. And then you just see them laughing. You see the girls laughing. And then Michelle Williams, Arlene, she's like, woohoo. It's just such a great little scene. It's so funny. So then the girls take Checkers. They take him out to do his business. Okay. And you get one of the swears in this movie, which is Michelle Williams, Arlene. She says, would you just look at that shit? Oh, I mean, poo-poo. It's just really silly. But they take him out, and then they are trying to find where the Oval Office is so they can give the dog back. And they end up finding the shred room. Okay, and the shred room is where they were shredding documents, and they had money and all this. And they were like, who are you? What's going on? And pretty much they have no idea what just happened. But then they have, I believe it was Haldeman, kind of comes across them, and they're just like, oh no, what the heck? And there's also a really fun little scene. So they're walking, and they're like, I think we have to go right. And then, or it was I think we have to go left. And they end up turning left, but it was because they couldn't turn right. And then literally Arlene's like, well, it's because you couldn't go right. And so I just thought that was kind of silly. But they find the shred room. Haldeman sees them there, be like, oh God, no. And so then they just run back, all freaked out. And they're just like, oh no, we didn't mean to see this place or whatever, and they're just freaking out. The girls are just freaking out. So a little bit about these scenes that I just was talking about. So you'll notice during this scene with Larry and the girls, there's these television commercials kind of showing. So there's a Cocoa Puffs ad, I believe. There was also another ad with I can't believe I ate it all. And then there was a television show that they had. So this was actually all stuff from the time in the 70s. Andrew Fleming actually said that if he ever does, he has done directorial stuff since, but that he would not even really want to try to do that again because it was just too much of a headache to actually get lawyers and stuff to say it's okay to use this and all. It's a good attention to detail, if you will, but it also, it was one of these things where he just wouldn't want to do it again because it just was too much of a headache, which I can imagine it is. So actually, when the girls are sitting in the auditorium that they are supposed to be, they actually it was supposed to be like this memorial service for Mac Washington, which Mac Washington, if you're not familiar, was a soldier that went over to Vietnam and died, and I guess it's to be assumed that he had went to their school or something. And so, it was supposed to be a scene like that, but that ended up getting cut because it kind of brought it down a little bit, so they still have that part of it where, they're talking about, like, we have to go see Dick again, we have to talk to him about the war and all, but the context of what they're sitting at in the auditorium was a memorial service for this person. That whole thing kind of got cut. But Michelle Williams, Arlene, she does bring that back up in their conversation with Dick, so I thought that was kind of interesting. When they come up to the White House gates, there's a song playing that you may recognize. It's Lady Marmalade, which was done by, I think, LaBelle or something like that back in the 70s. It then got remade in the early 2000s with Christina Aguilera, Lil' Kim, Maya, and Pink. That's the one I knew about, but this version is also really good. But actually, this song had not been released at the time of the time period of the movie. The song works, though, so it's a bit of an anachronism, but it still works, though. Andrew Fleming was wanting to find a song that would make sense for that scene, and Lady Marmalade just seemed to work, even though in the events of the movie, this song hadn't even been released yet, but it still worked. And then also, so this is kind of going into another bit of scenes I'm going to talk about soon, but it's funny because even with the pot cookies, so we end up finding out that the Hello Dollies had weed in them. But the thing is that if there actually were cookies that were laced with weed or whatever, they wouldn't actually hit you that quickly. So it's not like Nixon would be feeling lightheaded just automatically after eating a Hello Dolly. It would take a little bit of time for it to hit. And that also comes up in another scene when Dick is talking to Russia, the people in Russia, about stopping their occupation there, and the world's saved from that because they have these Hello Dolly cookies. But yeah, that's not really how pot cookies or pot brownies work like that, so that's just something as well. Next bit of scenes, we see Dick and the girls walking through the Oval Office, or they walking through the White House, and Dick makes an agreement with them that they can become secret youth advisors to the president. But that means they got to keep everything hush-hush of what they see going on at the White House. So that means they can't talk about that little room that they just found. Paper mache. It was actually paper mache that they were making. It's a hobby of his. And so you see them becoming secret youth advisors. And then you come back to Betsy's house and you see Larry sitting on the couch and his mom is pouring him champagne or something, and he's all do you think it's really over? And then the mom's well, he is the president on the TV, it's got to mean something. And so Betsy comes home and she finds out that the war has now ended in Vietnam and that Larry is actually not going to be drafted, which is great. And then Larry's all she's just mad because her dreams of being an only child were won't be fulfilled and she won't get my room or whatever. And then Betsy's I shouldn't even be telling you this, but the only reason that you're not going to war is because me and Arlene asked Dick to stop the war. You should be thanking me. And it's super fun. And she's just being so serious about it. Then the girls go to school and they talk about being secret youth advisors. So Betsy in her debate or current events class or something is talking about it. And then you have Michelle Williams talking about how she's is a secret youth advisor as well. I love Michelle Williams' scene in this because she's just it's fun being a secret youth advisor because that means that I'm trusted with sensitive national security issues or whatever. And it's just really fun. And then the teacher in there is really mean to Arlene, but she doesn't care. And I love Kirsten Dunst just talking about, hey, we making these Hello Dolly cookies and all this kind of stuff. And they just end up, being friends with Dick, and they go to the White House, and, they're going to be walking checkers and all that, and they're secret youth advisors. So they teach Dick about the peace sign, because he's like, well, what's that mean? And they're just like, peace. And he's like, oh, okay. And then you see him getting onto a plane, and then you see him do the peace sign, which was something taken from real life that you would see. You also see Arlene taking all of her photos down from her wall for Bobby Sherman and putting up wall pictures of Dick, which I think is kind of funny. And she just has this wall with Richard Nixon on it, which I'm just like, this is so silly. Then you have a scene where Arlene actually puts in contacts for the first time, and you see her without her glasses. She's been wearing glasses this whole time. But she now has contacts, so she, can impress Dick and look pretty for him. Then the girls actually come in on a meeting with Dick and some of the people from Russia, because there was an occupation in Russia going on there. And so they have the scene where they give these Hello Dolly cookies to the people. They give them to Dick. He gives them to the guys from Russia. And then world peace happens, which is just great. And they start singing a song from the musical Hello Dolly, which I think is just really silly. This guy probably putting a Russian accent on or whatever. He's just singing Hello Dolly in the middle of the Oval Office. And then Dick's like, I think you just declared peace in Russia or whatever. And I just thought it was so weird and hilarious. So you see that part. Then you see Arlene in bed. She's dreaming about Richard Nixon and her. Nixon, he rides in on a horse and she's on a beach. And he's just like, Arlene, I want to, I want to run away with you. And she's just like, well, what about Pat? And he's like, she'll understand. And they just have this nice little romantic, weird dream where it's they're spinning around in circle, and then there's a sand castle of the White House or something. It's just so weird and silly. And so then you have that dream sequence. Then you have Betsy and Arlene at the roller skating rink, and they're roller skating. And you start to also see that Betsy's noticing that Arlene is into Richard Nixon, that she's into Dick. And they go roller skating, where you hear the wonderful, it is a song that was on Ally McBeal. It was Hooked on a Feeling is what it was, by Blue Suede or something. And it's such a good song, and they just are roller skating to it. And so you find out that, Betsy knows about, you might as well just say it to me, just say it. And then Arlene just says, I love Dick. And then everyone at the roller skating rink is just laughing at them and all that, which I just think is really fun. Because again, these two are they're friends, they're each other's best friend. And so, you get to see their relationship. And then you have an introduction to a photo album that Arlene has of Dick, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So some fun facts about this bit of scenes. So you got, like I said, pot cookies do not really hit you instantly like that. So, but the world was saved, though. Peace in Russia was declared with the United States, so that's always really nice. So the roller rink that we're talking about is that it was in, I believe, Canada. It was actually a real roller skating rink. And so some of the extras at this roller skating rink, they didn't seem to know who was important people on set. So Andrew Fleming had kind of a hard time wrangling them and making sure that extras knew what they had to be doing, because it was all on a skating rink. But I thought this was kind of weird, or it was kind of mean actually. So some of the extras on this in this scene were really just rude to Kirsten Dunst and Michelle Williams. They would go up and skate to them and just say mean things to them, because at the time Michelle Williams was on Dawson's Creek, which was a really big teen show at the time. So they would just some people would just skate up to her and be like, I hate you on that show. like weird. And then Kirsten Dunst just being an actress, like being a teen actress at the time. You know, people are maybe jealous of her, or like they didn't like her movies that she was in or whatever, and they're just saying these mean things to them, which I thought was so, that was kind of fun to find out about. I was like, oh my god, that's so rude. How dare they? And also the contacts, there were actually soft contacts at the time of the movie, or at the time period that this movie is taking place in. So soft contacts were an actual thing. At least that's what Andrew Fleming and Sheryl Longin said on their commentary track. So it would make sense for Arlene to have those contacts in if she wanted to, you know, improve her eyesight. The girls in Arlene's room, and Arlene is showing Betsy her photo album of Dick. Here's cartoon Dick, and here are some newspaper clippings about him as a younger man. And it was just really fun to see that they have this little photo album. We then have Jello at the Job's residence, and this is where you find out about Woodward and Bernstein on the TV. They're talking about, you know, Betsy's parents are talking a little bit about them. But they also notice on the TV, Betsy and Arlene, they realize that, because the report is talking about how G. Gordon Liddy got in trouble, and they finally see, like, oh my god, wait, it's that guy. It's that guy from, you know, it's that guy that we saw that one time at the White House. What was he doing there? That's so weird. So then the girls actually call Dick in the middle of the night while he's watching This American Life or something, while he's also, like, eating food. And they call Dick. Randomly, they just call the White House in the Oval Office, and they call Dick about Liddy, and they're like, so what's happening with that Liddy guy? Because I saw him I lived at Watergate, and I saw him there, and then I saw him at the White House the next day, and then now he's going to jail. And so this kind of makes Dick suspicious. He's asking, like, you know, oh, Arlene, is there anything I can do for you or your family? And she's like, no. And she's just like, I have to go, good night. And then she just says, like, oh, my sweet prince. And so then the next day, they go to the Oval Office. They meet John Dean. This is when Arlene asks him who he is, and he says, I'm the president's lawyer. And then Arlene's just asking, like, why does the president need a lawyer? And then John Dean's like, your guess is as good as mine, pretty much. And so then they get the leash from Rosemary for Checkers, and then everyone's, like, gone, and, like, you know, everyone's not in the office anymore. And they end up finding, because the leash got caught in a drawer of Rosemary's, and they find this tape recorder. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't know what this is, but, like, you know, maybe you should tell him how you really feel. Like, maybe you should tell Dick how you feel about him through this tape recorder. And so Arlene starts a little message with just like, hi, Mr. President. We just love that, you know, we get to walk your dog for you and be your secret youth advisors and not much else. So here's Arlene. And so Arlene just, like, pours her heart out to him and is like, I love you. I know that we can't ever really be together because you're married and all, but I have this song that I want to sing by Olivia Newton-John, who unfortunately just passed away, like, a day or so ago, which is very sad. But she starts to sing while Betsy goes and, like, takes Checkers out for the walk and all that. Michelle Williams, Arlene, is just, like, serenading him with, like, I Honestly Love You by Olivia Newton-John. And it's just such a silly little scene, and she's, like, talking to him. Betsy comes back, and she's like, oh my god, you've been on for, like, 18 and a half minutes. What are you talking about to him? And Arlene's just like, personal stuff. And so they listen, so, you know, she stops her recording, and they listen back to the tape, and they start to hear different parts of the tape, and they're like, oh, well, I must have just, like, rewinded it a little bit too much. And they start to hear about, like, you know, just crazy stuff, like, oh, they're hiding some guy in South America or something. And then they hear, on the tape, they hear Richard Nixon being mean to the dog, and then they start to lose all faith. And so then Rosemary comes back, and I think Rosemary comes back into the office, or Dick comes back to the office, and you just see on their faces that they're just like, they've lost so much faith from hearing all of this. And then they're just like, I gotta go. Like, we have to go. And so then you see Arlene running on like the National Mall, like right out where like the Washington Monument is and stuff like that. Which I guess they actually did shoot in DC. So a little fun facts about this batch of scenes was that the recorder in Rosemary's office, or in her little desk, was actually accurate to the time that the movie takes place. But it actually would have been like way more cumbersome to actually get a recording because it would have just sounded crazy. I believe I Honestly Love You by Olivia Newton-John. I don't think that song had actually come out quite yet in the middle of this, because if we're assuming that this is supposed to be around 72 to 74 around there or something, I don't know if that song had come out quite yet, but, apparently it did. So we have the girls who sit down to confront Dick about this tape that they found, and we don't think you've been completely honest with us. And then Richard Nixon's all like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just about that Woodward and Bernstein and, those ungrateful muckraking bastards or something like that is what he uses. And they're just like, well, actually, it was just about the dog. And Betsy says, you act like you care about him, but you don't. But then they're like, but you know what? Now that you say that, people say that you lied. And then they confront him pretty much. And they're just like, you kick checkers, you're prejudiced, and you have a potty mouth. And then this just like makes Dick go crazy on them and just like chase him out of their office. And then they just go running screaming. But this just kind of fractures their relationship with Dick. And so then you see Arlene running away. Betsy's going after her. And Arlene's just so mad at herself because she's like, how could I have loved him? How could I have liked him? And then Betsy's all like, Dick was really important to me too. But, now I've realized that, you can't let Dick run your life. And then it just is all loud. There's like this marching band playing or whatever. And it was just like, do you mind? We're trying to have a private conversation. Which I thought was really funny. Then Arlene goes home and she throws away all her Dick memories and like she burns his photos that she put up and all that kind of stuff. Because she's mad and they're going through a little breakup. And so that they weren't even in a relationship, but whatever. Then you see a scene where the girls are at home and Larry gets busted. Ooh, he gets busted at the movie Deep Throat. Ooh, because that's a porno movie and that's not good. So, so Larry gets busted and then the girls go upstairs because the parents tell them to go upstairs. And so they decide, and Arlene doesn't seem to know what Deep Throat means. And so Betsy literally like whispers in her ear what exactly it is. Like, that's where the woman puts the man's penis in the blah, 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 and all this. And it's just like, she takes like a good 5 to 7 seconds. Arlene is just like thinking and posturizing about it. And then they just go to the window and yell out the window while Crocodile Rock by Elton John is just like over them. And it's really funny. It's just like so silly. But it does seem like kind of like what would happen with girls. They're just like, oh my God, what? But then they decide to do some prank calls. And so they decide to prank call the Washington Post for whatever reason. Because they find out about Woodward and Bernstein and be like, oh, we should call them. And, we should prank call them. So they prank call Bob Woodward. And he answers. And at one point it was supposed to be like, there was like this British accent that, Arlene puts on and to get them through. And they're just like, we know stuff about Dick. I mean, the president. And they end up talking about the creep list. And, they talk about how they have that. And they're just talking about like, like he was really cool at one point, but then he just like got all weird and crazy. And so then Woodward and Bernstein, they decide like, hey, like we need to meet you. Can you meet with us, soon? And they're like, now's not a good time, but like, hey, you know what? Like you can meet us at this parking garage near where Garfinkel's is, and we can meet you there. And they're like, okay, cool, got it, sounds good. And so then when they hang up the phone, before they hang up, Woodward asks, like, what name can I use for you so that I know who you are? And then they're just like, Deep Throat. Deep Throat. And then they're just like, he's like, okay, that's fine. And then they just make fun of Larry by like calling him, come here, Deep Throat boy. And they're just like making fun of him. They're making fun of her brother. Like, it's just so silly. So we'll move into some little fun facts about this batch of scenes. So they confront Dick about the tape and everything. And so little fun fact about the wardrobe of this movie, the costume designer actually found these pieces in a warehouse in St. Louis, and a lot of these were actual clothes from the 70s, which is why they look kind of authentic. It does look kind of weird now that we look at it, but like this was actually authentic clothing. The awkward thing about these clothes, though, is that they were really they were made out of polyester and all this kind of stuff, and that really holds odors a lot, and that also gets really hot. And they were like shooting this in the hot times in DC, and as somebody who lives near that area, I mean, it can get hot when they're doing stuff. Like, it can get hot in the summer and even the spring to a point when it's getting into summer. So, it must have been horrible. And then also some of the extras in some of these scenes, because they had to be period extras, they had to be put in these clothes. I mean, some of these people even like passed out kind of because it was so hot. But that makes total sense. So as I said before, the Olivia Newton-John song wasn't released at the time of the time period of this movie, but anachronism, doesn't really matter, whatever. Arlene Running was actually shot in front of the actual White House. It was actually shot in DC. Garfinkel's, which is a place that they talk about in this movie, was an actual department store. It closed in 1990, but it was a real DC Metro area department store. It was actually also referenced in All the President's Men as well, so it was a real place, actually. And like I said, this DC shoot was shot during a heat wave, so it must have been horrible to like shoot because you're getting up to like 100-something degrees and it's like horrible and you want to die because it's so hot. Oh, the girl screaming out of the window was shot at like 3 a.m. and the neighbors were just like, what is this? What is going on here? And so then the director and the writer, so Andrew Fleming and Sheryl Longin, they actually visited the Washington Post to kind of see what it was like because they just had like an empty office building that they were able to use for their set for the Washington Post. But there was that. Bruce McCullough and Will Ferrell actually met on this set of Dick. I don't think they knew each other before that. And then it's kind of a fun fact, but then one of Will Ferrell's next films was actually Superstar, which was based off of a SNL skit with Molly Shannon. I don't know much about that movie, actually, but Will Ferrell was in it, and Bruce McCullough actually directed that. So that was kind of another fun little thing that they had. And the role of Ben Bradley, so Ben Bradley was like Woodward and Bernstein's boss at the Washington Post, and he is a character in All the President's Men. But the role of Ben Bradley was actually offered to the real guy. Andrew Fleming was like, "Hey, if you want to, you can be the real guy." So Ben Bradley turned it down, though, but he did give his blessing to the production, which I thought was kind of cool. And Washington Post actually gave this movie a good review after they had seen it, and the critic who was covering it at the time gave it a good review, which I thought was kind of fun. Girls meeting Woodward and Bernstein at the parking garage. So they're really just meeting Bob Woodward at first. And they're dressed in these like little weird spy like trench coats, which I thought was really cute. And so Bernstein actually just like shows up on his bike, and Woodward's kind of mad at him because he's like, this is my story. Like, what are you doing? Which was kind of their relationship in real life, I think. But so the girls meet Woodward and Bernstein. They tell them about this, what was going on with Dick, and that they did have the creep list, but unfortunately the dog ate it. And then Woodward and Bernstein are just like mad about it. And so this is also where we get the line, how old are you? And then Betsy's like, 23. And Woodward is like, is that your combined ages? And then Betsy's just like, there's no need to be snotty, which I just think is really funny. But yeah, so Woodward and Bernstein, they're like, oh my god, these girls, like, what the heck? Like, why? We don't have any proof of anything. They're just talking about this, yada yada. They're just like, this is a bust, whatever. We could have gotten in trouble for sneaking out like this. But then you have that scene ends. The girls are now leaving school, and it seems like they are being followed by the quote-unquote plumbers. So then you have the Ben Bradley scene where he's talking to Woodward and Bernstein about this story. You need to get solid evidence on this. So then the girls and Woodward and Bernstein talk over the phone while Arlene's mother, played by Terry Garr, is making their little TV dinners or something, and they're on the phone with Woodward and Bernstein, and they're just like, we can't really talk right now, and they actually, Woodward and Bernstein, they have this thing of like, we'll just say some names to you, and then if you don't say anything after the count of 10, we'll assume that these are the people that are on the list. And so they do that, and then Woodward and Bernstein are like, oh yeah, like, we got this, great, wonderful. And so they run a story where they talk about, what had happened and who was involved with this, but it ends up that story was actually butkus, and wasn't actually accurate. So then you see the girls at the library, and you see the Woodward and Bernstein, they're in the stacks of the library, and they're like, you little pieces of shit are the problem, because we ran the story, and now they're denying it, and now we look like schmucks, and all this. And then Betsy's just like, you guys are the big shot reporters, like, can't you do anything for yourselves? And then Bruce McCullough just says, like, you're ruining my life. And I love my one favorite quote of this is Arlene talking about how, like, they have a very important school report on turquoise jewelry due in 2 days, and we can't find any books about it. I just thought it was such a funny little scene and little line. It's so weird. But anyway, so they got them at the library, and the girls are just like over it. They're just like, what the heck? And then Arlene comes home, and she sees that her mom has suddenly just got this hot boyfriend that she met. And so it's like, okay, like, what the heck? And then the boyfriend says, it's nice to meet you, Arlene. And then Arlene's like, how do you know my name? And she's wearing like a shirt that has Arlene embroidered on it, which I thought was really fun. So you have the suspicious boyfriend that, Arlene's mom gets. And then you have Betsy's family goes out and they come back home, and their house has been broken into. But weirdly enough, nothing has really been, like, disturbed or anything. The only thing that was stolen was the Hello Dolly recipe, which is, like, really weird. So we'll move into some fun facts about this part of the show, or this part of the movie. So we got, I'm looking through my notes. So very much like the girls meeting Woodward and Bernstein, in All the President's Men, it was just Woodward who went to go see Deep Throat at a very similar parking garage. So that's obviously like a nod to the movie, it seems like. And as I stated, the Ben Bradley scene where he's talking to Woodward and Bernstein, that was actually offered to the real Ben Bradley, but he turned it down. The girls and Woodward and Bernstein talking on the phone, that is a direct reference to All the President's Men, because similar thing kind of happens in that movie, where Woodward and Bernstein do that, and they run a story, and it ends up being wrong. Funny enough, the girls and Woodward and Bernstein at the library, the line, we have an important school report on turquoise jewelry due in 2 days. That was actually a really hard line for Sheryl Longin to make, I guess. And so she was like racking her brain on what kind of lines she could use for that. And then Arlene's mom getting a boyfriend. So the way that she says that he met her was that, she had this chocolate, excuse me, my chocolate or my peanut butter is in your chocolate or something, which I think she says penis butter in the actual movie, which I thought was really funny. It's really weird. But that was actually a reference to a commercial at the time with for Reese's peanut butter cups, where it was like, hey, you got my chocolate in your peanut butter, and you got my peanut butter in my in your chocolate. So then Betsy, she's reeling from her, house being broken into, but she thought it was really weird that, like, for some reason, nothing was stolen except for the Hello Dolly's recipe. So that her and Arlene are on the phone, they're talking about, like, I don't know what's going on, but then they start to suspect that there's some weird things going on. Betsy starts to, suspect, like, oh, maybe we're being watched or whatever. But she doesn't say that. She actually runs over to Arlene's house, her apartment, and she goes into her room and she turns on the stereo or the phonograph or record player or whatever, which is playing The Locomotion, which I thought was great. And she's saying, like, we're being bugged, we're being bugged. And then Terry Garr just comes in and she's just like, what are you guys doing? And be like, oh, we're just singing this new song, like, we're being bugged, the White House, and Arlene's mom's just like, I know something's going on here. I don't want to know what it is. And so they're just like freaked out and just like, what the heck's going on? So then Woodward and Bernstein call Arlene's house. Arlene's just like, nope, we don't want the subscription. We prefer the news on TV. But then it's just getting to her and it's just getting to them. And they're just like, oh my God, he's trying to make me crazy. Dick is trying to make me crazy. So then the girls like go outside and they're getting chased by the plumbers and they're like running through the streets and they're just like, oh no. And so they're just like, running through and then they're getting chased by this van and they just like go into this alley and they jump to the side and they fall into some trash. And then Arlene's just mad and she's just like, I don't know why they keep just treating us like stupid teenage girls. And then Betsy just says like, well, we are stupid teenage girls. And then she's like, no, Betsy, we're human beings and American citizens. And 7 years ago, our forefathers did something. I don't know, but all I know is Dick's ass is grass. And it's just so funny. And it's now deciding that like, we're going to get even with this guy. So what they end up doing is they go over to H.R. Haldeman's house. They see this young man by the name of Chip outside, played by young Ryan Reynolds. At this time, he would have been on Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place, I think. And before that, he had been on a show called Hillside in Canada, which was on Nickelodeon in the early 90s. It was called 15, was what it was called in the U.S. But that's Ryan Reynolds. He's washing this car outside of Haldeman's house. And then Arlene's like, we got to get in there. So, like, Betsy's like, okay, I'll distract him. So she goes up to him and distracts him. She's like, hey, remember me from the homecoming dance? And then they're just looking at each other. Her and Chip are just looking at each other. And they're just like, okay. And she's just like, do you want to make out? And then he's like, absolutely. So he goes into the Haldeman's house. So at this point, Betsy thinks that this must be Haldeman's son. And so they're going to like, kind of distract him so that Arlene can get in the house. And they can get these tapes. You got to get these tapes back, right? And so you got Arlene, you got Betsy and Chip up in quote unquote Chip's room. And so they're there kind of making out a little bit. Arlene gets into the house. Betsy goes into the bathroom and is like checking herself. And then she cries a little bit and then she's checking herself again. And she's just like, Arlene, get in here. So Arlene comes into the house. And then, Betsy's just like distracting the boy with like making out with him and like putting her hair in his face. And he's like doing a beer bong, which is it's a weird looking beer bong too. It's like this, like on a medical like stand or something where you'd put an IV. It's really interesting. But Arlene breaks into the house. And while she's there, Haldeman actually comes home. She hides underneath the desk. And, in this scene, you actually find out that, Haldeman, he gets a phone call and he learns about John Dean's resignation. And he's really realizing that, like, all of this is falling apart and all of this is just, like, coming undone. And he's just like, well, these prisons nowadays, like, they're like Club Med, And so, because he realizes he's like, oh, no, I'm screwed. I'm fucked with this whole thing because he knows where it's going to go. The shit has finally hit the fan. So this is a pre-big break Ryan Reynolds person. Like I said, he was on a television show. And he'd been on little TV things here and there, but this was one of his first kind of film roles he did. It was one of his first few. And you see him burp in the scene, and he could actually burp a bunch, which was kind of crazy. I thought that was really interesting. I was like, wow, then that's crazy. And so, yeah, apparently Ryan Reynolds could just burp on command for a bunch, which was kind of fun. So the being bugged conversation was a reference to All the President's Men. There is a scene in there where Woodward, I think, realizes that they're being bugged, like the phones are being bugged, and there's like a whole scene of like him and Woodward having to like talk to each other through a typewriter, which I thought was kind of interesting. That wasn't really a reference to anything, although I do think Betsy running to Arlene's was actually a reference to Dustin Hoffman in All the President's Men running through the city a little bit. So that was kind of interesting. Oh, but this gets to my little fun fact from earlier. So at the time of filming the scene with Dave Foley being Haldeman and, Betsy and Arlene breaking into Haldeman's house and everything, because that's where the tapes were that, Richard Nixon wanted to protect so much, he gave them to Haldeman. So there was actually an unfortunate event with the actor Phil Hartman. He was murdered by his wife at the time, and it was really, really sad. Happened in 1998, May of 1998. And so the scene where they're shooting that house was actually a kind of really hard day for Dave Foley, because if you don't know, Dave Foley was on a show called News Radio back on NBC, I believe, in the 90s, and Dave Foley was on it with Phil Hartman, so he worked with him. And then also Kirsten Dunst had worked with Phil Hartman on 2 separate occasions. She had been his daughter in like 2 movies she was in. So it was a very hard day on that set where, that was a very sad moment. But that's also where I got the idea of like, whenever this scene was done, it was done around probably spring of 98, because that all happened around that time. So it's a very sad moment. So then you have Betsy and Chip. They're in this room, and Chip accidentally, he sits on a pin or like a button of Nixon, and he's just like, oh, the fascist. And be like, Betsy's like, well, wait, he's your dad's boss. And be like, my dad's not Haldeman. Like, what are you talking about? I am Chip, like Haldeman's son's roommate. And she's just like, so you don't remember me though? And be like, funny, because we never met. I just thought you were cute, I just saw you on the street, thought you were cute. And so you see that like Betsy comes downstairs with Chip, and then Arlene is like trying to like get out of the house, but Haldeman's there, and Haldeman like sees these two, and Betsy's just like hiding her face with her hair, and she's just like, no, you can't see me. And he's just like, who are you? And then he's like, aren't you the dog walkers? And then Betsy and Arlene just like scream. They run out of his house with the tapes in hand. And then Haldeman just says like, get back here, you little bitches. And then they're just like, ah. And then they just go, they do the motion of just kiss my ass or whatever. It's so funny. And they run away. So then the girls have dictated the transcripts of the recordings, and they give them to Woodward and Bernstein, because Betsy can type 30 words a minute, which is great. So good for her, I guess. And so they want to keep the tapes for themselves because that's their souvenir. But here's the transcripts of what we have, and then this kind of helps break open what actually happened at Watergate, and they're able to run this story in the Washington Post. We then discovered Nixon at home, and he realizes what was on the 18 and a half minutes that were deleted out of the Watergate tapes. And it was actually just Arlene, like, serenading him and, like, professing her love to him. And she's just like, and he's just like, oh God, like, a 15-year-old, they'll crucify me for this, caving in on itself. And then you see the girls back at Betsy's house, and then the Hello Dolly recipe is back. They're like, wait, like, the Hello Dolly's recipe is back. Like, we thought that was stolen. Where'd they ever find it? And then Larry tells them, like, it's on every condensed milk can, dummy. And so Then they learn that the Hello Dollies that they were making were actually laced with weed, which they didn't realize before. And then Larry says like, "Whoa," and then they're like, "No, the president ate those." And then Larry's just like, "Whoa, maybe that's why he was so paranoid," which I thought was kind of funny. And then you have the Nixon resignation, where the girls are at the mall and they're at like Sears or something, and Betsy's like, "Come on, Arlene, like you have to watch this," and it's literally Nixon resigning in front of the United States people on TV. And it's like a really big moment in history. And Michelle Williams, I think Arlene says like, "It'll be different now," and then Betsy's all like, "They'll never lie to us again." And then you go into this song from Carly Simon, "You're So Vain," and you see the girls cutting up the American flag to make these outfits. And then Arlene brings up the idea of like, isn't it illegal to cut up the American flag? Or no, Betsy does. Betsy says, "Isn't it illegal to cut up the American flag?" And then, Arlene's like, "Not if you sew back together." And so during this whole scene, you see the girls making these costumes, these outfits out of the American flag. You then see Richard Nixon actually leaving on the helicopter. The press is there. They're taking photos of everything. And then you see him take off in the helicopter, fly away. And he's flying away into abject, despair because he was found out. And then you see that, the girls are in these outfits, which I love the line that Kirsten Dunst, when they're looking in the mirror at themselves, and she just says, "We look so fantastic." And so then you have them have this little banner that they were working on, and they're waiting until like the helicopter comes over the roof of where they're at on their little deck. And then they hold this banner up on both sides, and it pretty much just says, "You suck, comma, dick. Love, Deep Throat." And it's kind of that little last bit of like, "Ha, gotcha," and they're just like blowing him kisses and just be like, "Ha, see you, tricky dick. Like, look, you suck, dick." Like, and it's just really funny and wholesome and great. And then Richard Nixon just like flips them off, and then he flies into the future. And so then you find out, this is the end of the movie, you find out what happened with, these folks getting convicted of the crimes, and then Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon of what he did. Larry, Betsy's brother, apparently helped invent Quaaludes and made millions of dollars from this. And then from an investment with Larry, Betsy and Arlene were actually able to open a roller skating disco, which is really wonderful. And then the end of the movie is the end credits, and then Michelle Williams and Kirsten Dunst just like skating in the Oval Office while ABBA's Dancing Queen is just like playing. And then the rest of the credits is actually a cover of Dancing Queen from Sixpence None the Richer. And then that's Dick. Then that's the movie. So a little bit of fun facts for this film, this ending part. So this ending song was actually not going to be Carly Simon. It was going to be a Led Zeppelin song. But the song just really didn't work. But Carly Simon, they decided, okay, we'll use this song. And she actually did let them use the song, which was great. The song was actually going to be used in another part of the movie. So that's kind of an interesting fact. And so then the "You Suck, Dick" ending. So you'll notice if you have the Blu-ray or if you have an HD version of this film, you'll notice on Michelle Williams' back, you can tell that she's covering up a tattoo on her lower back, and I guess maybe they didn't cover it as well as they should have, or it's kind of hard to do that when you're filming a movie. It can just show up sometimes, but she is covering a tattoo that's on her lower back. And then Sixpence None the Richer did their little cover of Dancing Queen. They were known at the time for being the people who did the Kiss Me song from She's All That, which is another fun little 90s teen movie. And so that's the movie Dick. So I really think this movie is such a fun little gem from 1999. The hilarious performances throughout it. It's not gut-busting funny, but I think it's funny on a different level. And I do think it is a fun little kind of reimagining of what happened with Watergate, I wouldn't say it is completely historically accurate, all of it. But there are little parts of it. It reminds me of something like, even Forrest Gump a little bit, where like there's these historical events that are happening, but they're condensed in a way where you're able to kind of digest them and take them in, which I thought was really cool. I also think it's really funny that this movie came out months after Bill Clinton had been impeached for his for his misgivings in the White House with Monica Lewinsky and that whole scandal and everything. And I think this movie is just a fun little satire about it'll all be different and they'll never lie to us again. And then months before this movie came out, that's exactly what happened. Like, Bill Clinton said he didn't have sexual relations with that woman, but he did. And, then he got impeached for it, and then we even had, with like Donald Trump in our office, we had scandals all the time when he was in office going on. And, it was just this kind of movie, it's interesting to look at it and be like, oh, remember those days where Nixon was just in office and we had this thing to deal with, but like, oh, the good old days kind of a thing, which I just thought was it's really cool for a movie like this, for sure. And so that brings us to the end of this episode. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so at cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. If you want to give me any movie recommendations, if you want to give feedback on the show, or if you just want to say, hey, I am open to all of it. You can also follow Cult Cinema Circle on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram handle is Cult Cinema Circle, and on Twitter it is Cult Cine Circle. On those platforms, I tend to post when an episode has gone live, what the next episode's going to be, and you can engage with me on there if you'd like. You can also follow me on Letterboxd. My Letterboxd is Jesse, Jesse, Kremp, Kremp, and I go on there and I log the movies that I watch. I put up reviews of movies that I liked or didn't like or whatever, and just general foolishness over there. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe on your podcatcher of choice so you can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, or whatever podcatcher you like using. So, give me a 5 stars, give me a good review. It helps the show get seen by people. And again, I thank you so much for listening. And remember, there's always time for Hello Dolly. Thanks so much. Bye.